Between remakes of Resident Evil 4, Silent Hill 2, and even Alone in the Dark, this has been a great year for survival horror games updated for modern times. One remake you might not have heard about is Haunted House, a brand new take on Atari's classic 1982 Scarefest. It's a game that traps you in a constantly changing mansion full of ghouls, ghosts, and things that go bump in the night, all in the hopes that you'll survive long enough to save your friends and uncover the house's many mysteries. That's a recipe for a spooky good time, but does this remake deliver on the scares, or is it a game that should have stayed in the 1980s? That's what we're about to find out when I review Haunted House from Atari. Released at the beginning of the 1980s, Haunted House is one of the earliest attempts to scare players through a video game screen. While certainly limited by the technology, Atari made the most out of the simple shapes and designs that it was afforded at the time, creating a game where the player has to use their imagination to fill in the blanks. Although rudimentary by today's standards, this addictive fright fest laid the groundwork for what would become the survival horror genre and helped to influence games like Alone in the Dark and Resident Evil. This new Haunted House reimagines the classic game as a modern-day roguelike. It tells the tale of a bunch of school-age friends who visit the creepy old mansion on the hill in order to investigate the mysterious disappearance of Zachary Graves, a famous collector of supernatural objects and one of the uncles of the teens. This proves to be a disastrous plan as Lynn gets herself trapped in the house and her four friends get caged up by whatever lurks in the shadows. It's now up to Lynn to not only investigate what happened to her uncle, but also rescue her friends and defeat the evil spirits once and for all. The good news is that we're introduced to a benevolent ghost named Spooky who's ready to point our hero in the right direction. The ghost tells us that a sacred urn broke into 3 parts and the most powerful ghost took them to different parts of the house. If Lynn can somehow find these pieces and put the urn back together, she'll be able to save her uncle and her friends. But watch out, because as Spooky tells us, the house is actively working against us. It's one thing to deal with ghouls and ghosts, but it seems as though the house itself is changing shape every single time you pass out or fall asleep. That's a fun and clever way to set up the roguelike elements. This is the kind of game where you'll slowly learn the ins and outs of the haunted house through exploration and discovery. Every playthrough is a little different, with the rooms rearranged every time, but the goal remains the same. Survive long enough to collect the sacred objects and then use them to defeat the boss in order to earn a part of the urn. If you can do all that, you'll be given a key to the basement where you can free your caged up friends and then play them in future playthroughs. At its core, Haunted House is a fairly straightforward stealth action game. Lynn sneaks around a bunch of rooms, each filled with ghosts, gargoyles, scary dolls, wraiths, swamp creatures, Frankenstein's monsters, the Babadook, and, well, pretty much anything else that could invade your nightmares. Your trusty lantern will hurt them, but you definitely don't want to take the more direct route. The best strategy is to sneak up behind the monsters and light them up. Literally. It actually works almost exactly like subduing a guard in Metal Gear Solid, Splinter Cell, or pretty much any other stealth game. Now, if you can't sneak up behind the monster, then the next best thing is using one of the many traps and items that you can get from the treasure chests. These will often freeze the enemy in place, allowing our hero to run up and use their lantern. There are other items that will speed up the characters, soften the footsteps, and of course, refill their life. That's an important one. What I really like about this game is how every room has its own unique challenge. The goal isn't always to simply defeat the ghouls, but rather you'll have to find an item or complete a quest in order to open up the doors to the next room. Sometimes it's as simple as finding and then placing a relic, while other times you'll need to chase down a raccoon that has stolen the key. There are levels where you'll need to survive for a set amount of time, while other stages will want you to defeat the 4 or 5 ghosts that inhabit that room. This means that you're going to be interacting with the room in a bunch of different ways, which really shakes up the action and keeps you on your toes. The problem with this approach is that the difficulty level can shift wildly from one room to the next. You know the quest that I just told you about where the goal is to find the relic and then place it on a table? Well, that turns out to be insanely easy. In fact, about half the time you're going to find the statue in the very first treasure chest you look, which means that you're going to be able to clear the level of monsters within seconds of entering the room. And then, in the very next room, you may be asked to defeat 7 different bad guys, many of which will require traps and perfect timing. This is substantially more difficult than finding a statue or racing down a raccoon. There needs to be a little bit more balance between the rooms, I think. I also had some minor issues with the gameplay, especially when it came to sneaking up on the ghosts. It's easy enough when they're floating around the room, but things get a little dicey when they're asleep. Now, you would think that this would be when they're at their least dangerous state, but you would be wrong. In order to sneak up and defeat them in a single hit, you're gonna need to get directly behind them. Not off to the side or even in front, but sneaking up from behind. This makes no sense, and it makes the sleeping bad guys surprisingly frustrating. I mean, they're fast asleep, so shouldn't you be able to sneak up from literally any direction? Why do I need to use a trap if they're not even conscious? And more importantly, why is the aiming of the lantern so difficult? Okay, look, for the most part, I was able to overlook the unpredictable difficulty spikes and the weird gameplay choices. As it turns out, what really annoyed me about Haunted House were the technical problems, which seem to come in as many forms as the ghosts and ghouls that inhabit the constantly changing mansion. These bugs come in all shapes and sizes, from the camera simply getting stuck, to the map disappearing, to everything slowing down to an absolute crawl for no reason. There are also bigger problems, like when the game gets confused about where the door is supposed to lead. I ran into multiple problems where I'd get trapped in a series of rooms because they forgot to generate an exit. There's also a room where you're supposed to trigger a large statue in order to earn a perk. The problem is that if you enter that room a second time, it'll still want you to interact with the already used statue. If you can't activate the statue again, you can't actually complete the quest, and if you can't complete the quest, you can't exit the room. The only solution is to give up and start over from the start. That sucks! Even with these annoying bugs and glitches, Haunted House still remains a lot of fun. There's a surprising amount to do and find here, including completing quests inside the mansion, unlocking all your friends, and collecting gems that'll not only upgrade your character, but also spruce up the house. The bosses are also a lot of fun, as it allows the game to shift from being about stealth to all-out action. Each of the boss encounters look great, and they're all a little different, so you can't just keep using the same strategy. Speaking of things that look good, I dig the style of this game. Oh sure, it's not the best looking horror game on the market, but the rooms are detailed with all kinds of fun touches and references, and the enemies are appropriately goofy and cartoony. It actually reminded me a lot of something like Grabbed by the Ghoulies, which is a good tone for this style of horror game. They wisely gave this game a sense of humor, and that goes a long way. I suppose that gamers who are fed up with roguelikes will probably not be convinced to take one step into this haunted house, but everybody else should give it a chance. It's easier than many games in the genre and has a great sense of humor. Couple that with a ton of upgrades and extras to unlock, and you have a fun update to the 1982 classic. This is a title that retains the spirit of the original game, all while giving us enough depth to keep modern gamers interested. It may not be real scary, but Haunted House fans looking for a good time should be more than happy with this worthwhile remake. Long before Resident Evil, Alone in the Dark, and Silent Hill, there was Haunted House, a classic Atari 2600 game that paved the way for the horror genre. This brand new remake adds a compelling story and introduces enough length to keep fans playing until they've beaten all the ghosts and unlocked all the extras. Sadly, the scariest part of Haunted House are the unpredictable technical problems and the occasional gameplay issues. But even with that to look out for, this proves to be a solid update that understands what made the original game so special. Haunted House is worth the visit. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite survival horror game? We've really been seeing the revival of the genre over the last few years, so I'm excited to see what your picks are in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back later this week with a new episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,